Hey everyone, welcome back to the Addiction Nutritionist podcast. I am joined by my co-host Nikki and I today to talk about pillars of recovery. So this kind of came up through just a conversation that Nikki and I were talking about of, what are the things that really have propped up our recovery? And we were like, oh, we should do a podcast about that. So today is going to be so packed full of resources because Nikki and I took time to kind of go through and brainstorm and think about and meditate on the things that have really propped us up since we've entered into this state of recovery. And those things are probably very different for both of us, and there might be some overlap as well. We actually haven't shared our pillars with each other because we wanted to just have a really sort of organic and authentic conversation. And so it'll be enlightening to me and hopefully to you in terms of what Nikki shares today and what her pillars are and what my pillars are. But at the end of the day, we hope that you'll walk away from this podcast or this conversation just with more tools. You may hear something today that really resonates with you. You may hear one of our pillars and be like, wow, I haven't thought about that. That's maybe an area of something that I should work on. And other things won't resonate with you. And other things you might say, oh, I totally did that. And that worked so great for me. So whatever experience you walk away with today is normal and wonderful, but my hope is that it will be of some value to you. So before we dive into our pillars, we have to talk about our sponsor today, which is blueberries. Blueberries. Let's give some love to blueberries. I have some in my fridge right now.
Me too.
Freezer. Oh, awesome. Blueberries are an amazing food. Another one of these foods I never ate growing up. They were around me, but they were never in my house. I maybe vaguely remember eating strawberries very occasionally, but not blueberries. So I didn't start eating them until I was an adult. And I really didn't start eating them until I read the book Genius Foods by Max Lugavere. I don't know if have you read that book, Nikki?
No.
Okay.
Love the sound of it though.
Max Lugavere, I don't do like gurus, right? But there's a handful of people out there that I follow in the health and wellness world that I don't know how else to refer to them other than they're just like my favorite people. And Max Lugavere is one of my favorite people, one of my favorite resources. He's a health and science journalist, and his mom, oh, such a sad, sad story. She passed away from Alzheimer's, and he's pretty much dedicated his life to helping people understand the value of nutrition in cognitive health and overall health. And so when he wrote the book Genius Foods, years ago, I snatched it right up, and it goes through a number of different healthy foods, and blueberries is one of his foods. I don't know that he uses the term superfoods. That's kind of like a catchphrase in the health and wellness industry, but he does classify blueberries as one of the top brain health foods. They have really amazing cognitive benefits. So at least half of the information I got about blueberries was from his book. But blueberries have this group of chemicals called polyphenols, and there's different types of polyphenols. And the one that's in blueberries is a type of flavonoid. There's all these kind of different like groups and classes, and that's like all the super sciencey stuff that I don't fully understand. But if you were to boil it down, the most abundant flavonoid that is in blueberries is called anthocyanins. And anthocyanins are what make blueberries blue. It's that deep, deep hue. So that's kind of really good information, because when you're looking at fruits and vegetables, when they have this really powerful hue, like a bright, bright red or a deep, deep purple, that's usually indicative of these different types of chemicals that have health benefits. So the anthocyanins make them blue. One of the amazing discoveries about blueberries is that the anthocyanins in the blueberries can cross the blood-brain barrier. We often refer to this as the BBB, the blood-brain barrier. It's that really protective sac around your brain that is supposed to protect it from anything that could harm it, like a virus, a bacteria, fungus, anything that you want to keep out of the brain that could potentially harm the brain, parasites, right? So it's a really, really selective kind of like security fence. It is very specific about what it lets in and what it doesn't. And it lets the anthocyanins from blueberries in. And what they found is that those anthocyanins aggregate in the hippocampus, which is, as we know today, a large part of the memory center of the brain. Memory is not only stored in the hippocampus, but we typically refer to the hippocampus as the memory center of the brain. So they've done a handful of studies on this and have shown that eating blueberries can increase your memory. I read one study that said it can prevent cognitive decline by 2.5 years. So, if you're eating blueberries regularly on a weekly basis, maybe 3 times a week, that group of people started to experience cognitive decline a little bit later than other folks that are already, up in age. So I think that there's probably a lot more work to be done and a lot more studies that can be done. But I found many, many, many resources that all shared that same bit of information about blueberries being really important for memory. And I mean, I don't know about you, but I could definitely use help with my memory. If anything, at this stage of my life, it's the number one area that I still struggle with significantly. So I'm going to go eat some blueberries today, but lots and lots of other benefits of blueberries. They're protective of the heart. They've got a lot of folate and B6 in them, which if you've listened to this podcast before, you've probably heard us talk about. We definitely talked about it during the crucial nutrients episode, because folate and B6 are critical for making serotonin and dopamine. So they play a huge role in mental health. But folate and B6 also prevent the buildup of homocysteine, which is another sort of natural chemical that our body makes. But if homocysteine gets too high on a consistent level, it can really damage our blood vessels, which can lead to damage of the heart, right? And other heart-related issues. So it's protective of our mental health. It's protective of our heart, all kinds of other issues. It can help with diabetes control, type 2 diabetes specifically. The jury was kind of out in terms of type 1 diabetes. It's great for skin health. It has a lot of cancer prevention properties. So blueberries fall into that category of antioxidants. Antioxidants are chemicals found in certain foods, very specifically in berries, a lot of fruits and vegetables, but very high in berries. When we are out in the world and we're being exposed to things that can damage us, like breathing in pollution, or we're eating a really nutrient poor diet, or we work in an industry where we're exposed to a lot of chemicals, or we smoke, we're always being exposed to these unstable molecules that we refer to as free radicals. They're basically these little molecules that come into our body. I've probably talked about this before, but they come into our body and they just sort of bounce around and damage the tissues. They're missing, they're missing an electron. When we eat something like blueberries, that's really high in antioxidants, they're very generous with their electrons. So they basically enter into your system and they're like, hey, who needs an electron? And they just are, generously donating these things to make the free radicals more stable. So now the free radicals are like, oh, okay, we can calm down. We don't have to keep bouncing around looking for this electron that we need, bouncing into all of these tissues and damaging them. And so it stops that free radical damage. So the moral of that story is we live in a toxic world. So you really can't get enough antioxidants. You want to make sure you're always taking in more antioxidants than toxins to sort of offset that balance. So, they're high in the K vitamin, calcium, magnesium, vitamin A, choline, zinc, iron, phosphorus. They're a great source of potassium too, which I always find this conversation interesting. People who have high blood pressure, which is really common for people in recovery, especially the early stages of like quitting alcohol, you can get a lot of spikes in high blood pressure, even if you don't typically have it. They're like, yeah, I was told to lower my sodium intake. And that's really important. But I have literally never had a client tell me, a client in rehab or one of my private practice clients tell me that their doctor or their healthcare practitioner told them to increase their potassium intake. I always ask that question. And they're like, no, I've never heard that. Lowering your sodium is just as important as increasing your potassium for blood pressure. So it's fascinating to me that we're not talking about that enough. And blueberries have a bunch of potassium, not as much as, avocados or bananas, but a significant amount.
Wow.
So yeah, the last thing I would say is that there seems to be mixed science on whether or not frozen blueberries are a good choice. I've always been kind of under the impression that frozen berries and frozen fruits and vegetables are just as good, and in some cases even better, because they're picked when they're flash frozen. So the nutrient of that vitamin or that vegetable or fruit is higher. But in this case, I guess there was some evidence to suggest that the anthocyanins degraded over a 6-month period of sitting in the freezer. So I don't have a good answer to that. So I would just say a mix of frozen and fresh berries would be great. I would always go organic when we're talking about blueberries specifically. And if you can find wild blueberries, that would even be the best. I think those would be like the utmost nutritious for sure. We don't all have access to that, but if you do, then that would be a great choice. So there's blueberries. Yeah. Eat some blueberries today.
Wow.
Protect your heart, prevent cancer, support your mental health, right?
All those things. That's awesome. That's amazing how powerful they are.
Yeah, totally.
And so maybe like if you eat them, if you do have frozen blueberries, just make sure you eat them like within 2 months. Like that could probably be a good strategy, because that was a 6-month sort of study.
Yeah,
Or just don't let them sit in there forever.
totally. Yeah. If you're eating them on a consistent basis, putting them in your smoothies or whatever, you should be able to get through a bag within a month, right? So, yeah, that might be a good tip for sure. Awesome.
What do those anthocyanins, is
Uh-huh.
that, do those exist in all kind of like dark purple and blue foods, did you say? Fruits and stuff?
I know that it's responsible for making the blueberry blue. So I feel it, to me, common sense would say that if you're looking at other things like eggplant, maybe I would take a guess and say that they're probably in there as well.
Because I
Can't
eat
say
a
that
lot
for
of
sure,
blackberries.
but huh?
I eat a lot of blackberries.
Oh yeah. All the berries are excellent because they're low glycemic. They're wonderful for your blood sugar. They're really high in antioxidants. They're probably all slightly different in their makeup of polyphenols and flavonoids. I think the reason that Max Lugavere chose blueberries is because they're kind of at the top of the list, but any of the berries are going to be beneficial for those reasons for sure.
Can you say a little bit more about flavonoids?
There's all these different compounds that you're going to find in different types of fruits and vegetables. And it's so fascinating because if you look up one of these groups of flavonoids or whatever, the amount of compounds that are considered flavonoids or polyphenols is almost like endless. So I think there's a good chance we haven't even discovered all of them, and we don't know so much about them. We know very little about them. We just know that they're powerful plant compounds. So if you were to talk to somebody who's really well versed or a practitioner in plant medicine, that would be somebody that probably has a really deep knowledge of what flavonoids are and how they can, different types of them can benefit your health in different ways. That's all that I can really say about them, because I'm not an expert in those plant compounds, but the little that I have, the little research that I have done is truly remarkable in terms of how these chemicals can be so incredibly beneficial to the body for so many different reasons. So yeah.
Awesome. Cool. Yeah. Love it. I think there needs to be a little crown for the little blueberries, like little,
yes, the little
they're deserving
little miracle blue bulbs. Yep. Okay, so let's get into pillars. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to have Nikki I'm so excited to hear what your pillars are, because I don't, although we've had hundreds of conversations at this point over the years that we've known each other, I can kind of gather some of the things that I know have been really important to you, but to hear you talk about what these pillars are is so exciting, and I can't wait to hear what they are. So there's going to be a mix of pillars that are maybe more biochemical in nature, like that really speak to the physical nature of our body and the physiology. And then there's going to be pillars, I would guess, that'll fall more into the psychological category. And so you probably have a mix of those, and I can't wait to hear what they are. So I'm just gonna proverbially hand the mic over to you and let you start wherever you feel comfortable.
Okay, cool. So I'll say a couple things like before I get into them. One, when I was sitting down to list them all out, it became clear to me a few things, different things became clear. Like one, my pillars now, although they incorporate everything from early recovery, they're more refined. They're different now. Like they're more refined is probably the best way to put it. And so like, for example, early recovery, you know, there was, they were a little bit more simple and like cardio exercise, sunshine, you know, functional medicine doctor, support group, uh, really proper, incredible nutrition, you know, so those were probably my pillars in early recovery. Since then, and probably meditation and yoga. Since then, I've just, you know, because in early recovery, you're doing so much healing. I mean, you have so many systems that are just, you know, either damaged or short circuiting or malfunctioning. There's a lot of repair, so much repair, and you need so much support in the beginning. So, you know, and now I'm, you know, 20 plus years into my recovery. So I've gotten to put more energy into kind of like detox and just kind of daily different sort of things to take me to a higher level rather than focusing on just kind of like the emergency triage, stopping the bleeding.
Mm-hmm.
You know, now it's a little bit more about optimization. But I always have to be cognizant of the basics. They're still in there. They're just not as as they used to be. Somewhat. I mean, nutrition is still for sure. Like it's big neon always.
Yeah.
Like it's for sure a daily focus. So does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. And I appreciate you talking about that refinement process because that wasn't something I was thinking about when I was going through my pillars, but that's the exact same story for me. It was kind of like, I love your metaphor for the triage and to stop the bleeding, because you do feel like you're kind of on high alert and it is a crisis in the beginning. And so you're just trying to grab at the things that you can do each day to get you through to the next level. And so what my life looks like today is so much different than what it looked like years ago. So I appreciate you kind of talking about that. Yeah, for sure.
Cool. Thank you. And I will say, so for anybody who's listening who is in early recovery, I will say that these were my pillars at the beginning. I'm just going to list them again because a couple more came into my brain. So proper nutrition, a ton of protein, healthy fats, you know, and colorful whole foods, but really the protein, I was needing to like really up the protein a ton. Exercise, cardio, especially sunshine, maintenance with, you know, functional medicine doctors and chiropractic, support groups, therapy, and yoga. Those were my pillars. Now, so now I'll share with you what they are today. And it's, you know, as I was kind of going through them, is like in each section, it was almost like there's a mind, body, spirit component for each little pillar. Like how does this relate to mind, body? How does this relate to, you know, my spiritual needs? Yeah, so that was kind of interesting.
Actually, so before you go into that, I kind of want to go back first a little bit too. Yeah. Listening to you say cardio, I'm curious, you know, in early recovery, what drew you to cardio and how quickly were you able to implement that and what did it do for you?
Oh man, that's a great question. Well, I will say that what drew me to it was just like an inner need. I mean, there was something driving, there was a bigger force driving me in those early days, for sure, that I just had to follow. And I had just moved to Phoenix, Arizona to kind of dive into my recovery and all of the things. And there's a lot of like little mountains there to hike. So I used to be a runner, like not competitively, but I ran through high school and college just as my exercise. But over the years, I think just the damage that I did to my system, I was just not able to run anymore. You know, my body did not like running, cardiovascularly, really. And so I came across hiking. I became a hiker.
Mm.
And I think probably some of the reading and education that I was doing also was like the importance of, for neurochemistry, probably Kathleen Desmaisons' book and other ones were like, you have to exercise, you have to exercise, you have to exercise. So that was probably in there too. And also I was kind of like gaining weight because I was quitting alcohol, but eating a ton, like the sweets. So I had gained weight and I didn't want that to continue. So that was a vanity motivator too. So I got into hiking. I was biking some, but even that was like a little bit too much for me. I got into rollerblading.
Oh my
People
gosh,
laugh.
I love that.
People are always laughing at me because, they're, like, just like in the 80s. But it was great because Phoenix is so flat. It was the perfect place to learn how to rollerblade.
Yeah.
And I could just go so many places. There were wide streets and not super busy streets. So I could just create these really awesome routes for like 30, 45 minutes, an hour. And my body, it was like the running motion, but less intense, less hard on my body. And it was like just the perfect amount of everything. I still rollerblade. So that's
love that. I just freaking love that. I know people think it's tacky and I don't know why, because I think rollerblading is so fun. Like years ago, I used to do it all the time and I wasn't good at running when I was younger, teenage years or whatever, but I could rollerblade and I just remember feeling like so free. I don't know what it was. I used to, sometimes a friend and I, when I lived in California, I can't remember from what beach to what beach, but we would start in like Venice Beach or something and rollerblade all the way to this other beach. And we'd like drop our cars off and like maybe we looked like idiots, but I just thought it was like the funnest thing ever.
I don't think you look like idiots at all. I think like rollerbladers are awesome, especially if they've done, it's just like kind of graceful and amazing and cool. And I've done those paths too. When I lived in Los Angeles, I do Venice to, I don't know, Santa Monica and then up to like Malibu. And here I go around lakes and there's some paved paths too. So that's what I do when the weather's nice, because it's still just the perfect level for me. It's not too intense because I still, to this day, I can't overexert. I can overexert myself somewhat more easily than other people. And I think that has to do somewhat with my detox process and stuff. But so I need to like be very cognizant. Like I tried to do it. I did a 14er here not too long ago, like maybe a couple of years ago. And that's way more than my body needs, that sort of thing. I was wrecked for days. I did it, but I was like, it's too much. So you were asking, what did it do for me? All the things it helped convert all of the chemistry that needed to be converted in my brain to keep me happy. I think it helped with detox. Obviously it moved, I'm going to talk in a minute about circulation. It just moved. You have so much trapped energy, emotional, physical, all this stuff when you're early in recovery, and you need that stuff flushing through and getting out. And, you need that energetically getting out, you need it physically getting out. So however you can get your system flowing.
Yes, I actually was just this morning, I was making notes because I've been asked to speak at a consortium coming up next year, and they wanted me to touch on exercise a little bit. And the thought in my brain, I've had this thought before, but it came back to me when I was writing notes. I was like, I'm going to be speaking to providers. I don't know what the holdup is, but every PHP program, they need to have a treadmill. Maybe not detox necessarily, but they've got to have at least one treadmill in every single one of these sober living houses, residential programs, because just like you said, you've got to get that circulation going. There's so much trapped stuff. You think about the anxiety that people are usually experiencing in those situations, and they're in that fight or flight mode. And when you fight or flight literally means that your body thinks you're going to fight somebody or run away. And one of the easiest ways to physically metabolize that physiology, those hormones, is to mimic running away. So you get on a treadmill, you've got all this buildup of cortisol from anxiety because you're in fight or flight. 15 minutes, just walk. You can run if you want, you could jog, but just walking will help physically remove some of that, buildup of stress hormones in the body. And so that's an idea that I'm planning to push.
Oh my God, at 100%, Kelly. I mean,
it's so simple, huge. Right?
It's so simple.
Treadmill.
It's always available. One treadmill at least.
Yeah.
Or even group walks, making that mandatory after meals. That'd be amazing.
Right.
But I would say also, in addition to the things I said before, that was what I was doing. I was processing so much happens when you're moving your body that way, especially like my hikes. They weren't just straight up. There were some mountains there you would just go straight up, and those were a bit much. I really needed the kind that were like up, down, up, down. It's like that interval training in a way.
Mhm.
And so it just helps you process so much stuff when you're moving and breathing like that. So the anxiety, the depression, I had a lot of just kind of divine messaging coming through, and I didn't have like headphones in, it was a lot of quiet, I just kind of allowed myself to like process and breathe and do that. So I would say that was a underlying unconscious driving factor that was like, you just need to move and process and like open yourself up to wisdom and messages and that kind of stuff.
I love that. That's amazing. And I just want to touch on one more thing that you said, when you were talking about doing the 14er and you realized that was just too much. That was, a few levels above what you needed. That to me sounds totally like a part of the refinement and the optimization that you're talking about. Maybe there was a time where I'm just speculating here, you were so disconnected from what you actually did need. Like, it's so easy in early recovery for us to fall into that black and white thinking and to push things into the extremes. And somebody may be like, oh, I've got to go do an Ironman, but getting reconnected to what you're doing and how it's affecting your body and really kind of monitoring those things is such a huge part of what we would call like advanced recovery or later stage recovery, where you've balanced out those signals and hopefully you've become so much more in tune with what your body needs and what it doesn't need, and finding that balance, so I think it's really cool that you're like, nope, because in Colorado, that's the thing, right? Everybody's got to do a 14er. And I know so many people that do all of them all the time and this and that. And I'd like to try one too, but not falling into that trap of like, I have to do 14ers now, because I live in Colorado.
Yeah, 100%. And that's easy to do out here. So, and I will say also that when I do specifically remember, like when I really quit, like my last drink for a period of time, that's when I discovered my alcohol dependence, is because I couldn't even make it really up a flight of stairs. Like physically, even that small amount that I was still drinking, I think was giving me a considerable amount of daily energy. It was mind blowing to me. So when I did start exercising, it was like actually really, I was, as one of my doctors said, I was like beating a tired horse. I was forcing myself to do something beyond really the energy I had. That was really, I was like, wow, I was much more dependent on this for so many things. It was kind of revelatory.
Interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
All right. So my current pillars, I want to start by saying that all of these pillars fall under an umbrella of stress management and self-care. There's really not a pillar that's just self-care and one that's just stress management. Honestly, all of my pillars are self-care and stress management. Those are if I were to pick two pillars, that's what they would be: self-care and stress management, because that's where it all lies. So these are all just the tools underneath that. So I have 8. The first is proper nutrition, proper nourishment. Nourishment is the word that I used. And within each of these areas, within each pillar, I have a number of just things that fall under there. So proper nourishment to me is lots of water, fresh air, nature, high quality food, which means high quality protein, fat, and whole fruits and vegetables, supplementation and herbs. Fun is nourishment to me. And that usually is around, friends, comedy, art. Those are kind of like where I get my fun, and music. So those are how I nourish my mind, my body, and my spirit. The next one is activation. That's another pillar. So I know it was interesting when I was trying to come up, boil everything down. So activation for me is like really like how do I come alive every day? What? Yeah. Like, what was our question? What feeds you? What makes you come alive? So sunshine is an activator for me. Like I have to have it. It's a fuel source, and it activates all levels of my being. Breath work practices are activating. Kirtan, which is a yogic chanting practice.
Okay.
It's kind of like singing, is very activating for me. Inspiration for me is activating and super important. And that's usually in the form of like the arts, like going to a show, like looking at paintings or artwork or performance, or education, like listening to you talk.
Oh.
Those are activating for me.
Yeah.
So, and it's a big deal. Like that's how my spirit comes alive, you know? And then of course, the big one there is community. Like there's a lot of activation that happens when you connect with other humans, whether it's support group, friends, whatever it is. So humans are part of that. Connection with humans is part of my activation. Circulation is my next one. So that includes the cardio and aerobic, which are still huge in my life. And that can be hiking. It can be, I walk daily, and also especially because I have a dog. But I have to get cardio. So I do home stuff. Like I know that you have the Peloton app too. I do home fitness, and I also still hike. And in the warmer weather, I rollerblade. Massage helps with circulation for me. I do hot and cold water therapy. So I go to, at home, I have like a little in-house sauna, and then I'll take a cool shower after, but I go to a bathhouse. I go to this amazing bathhouse in Denver, and it is so not fancy. But it gives me gives you the opportunity to go alternate between sauna, cold shower, steam, cold shower, jacuzzi, cold shower. And that alternating for me is like the most wonderful self-care practice that I have. I love it so much. So that's really great for circulation. It's just that alternating hot and cold. What do you think? And I can tell you're thinking something.
Yeah, I just want to hear more about this. So, I mean, I'm hearing the physiological part of it, of increasing your circulation, but after a session of that, what kind of benefits are you feeling immediately, and how long do they last?
Oh man. Immediate benefits. I would say that it's a stress reduction practice, or experience immediately, just, sitting in that jacuzzi, and then sitting and in the sauna and all of that. And then the cold water, it's invigorating and does just some really incredible sort of balance. So it's like this, when you're coming from maybe a place of either stress, anxiety, depression. And so it either boosts up the depression, it levels you up if you're depressed, it lowers you down if you're anxious.
So it's like an adaptogen.
Like an adaptogen. So it gets you to neutral, but then makes you feel calm. Like so you're like activated, you feel really alive, yet you're calm. There's cold water therapy that's more intense. That's not what I'm talking about here. This is a cold, it could be if I were to stand in that super cold shower for, 10 minutes or something. They don't have a cold plunge.
It's not like a polar plunge.
Not like a polar plunge. No. So it's this sense of like balance and like, this balance, like everything just comes like back to center. And I feel kind of like, kind of cleansed in a lot of ways. And I would say like, I like to do it once a week. And I feel like that's a good reset for me. I lived in Los Angeles for a while, and my favorite bathhouse of all time is there in Koreatown. And it's really what helped me just stay sane and grounded in a city like LA. It was a place to just come back to like center. It's just very centering.
Is that something for the listeners at home that you think could be mimicked in the home, in terms of, do you think you would have similar effects if you, took like a cool shower and then moved to the warm water and that sort of, like we hear about this a lot in the recovery space, but a lot of the things that I see are people sort of doing things that are not accessible to everybody, where they're doing the barrel things, or they have this bath they've made on their deck or whatever. But I'm wondering if you can really mimic those effects, at least to some degree, by just using your shower.
For sure.
Yeah.
And Wim Hof, who I'm actually going to refer to later on in a moment, Wim Hof is like the man who's really brought this all to the forefront, right? And he talks about, it's just, you start small, You do like a 30-second cool rinse at the end of your shower, and maybe it's just one leg to start.
Oh, that's a good idea.
Right. And it could be cool, it could be cold. Like, he doesn't push. He's not like, you need to do this or this. He's just he's so much like you, like meet everybody where they're at, be compassionate, like little by little. So yes, I would say in the shower, just everybody's shower, finish with the cold rinse.
Yeah.
And work slow. I actually purchased an in-home sauna, and it's one of those funny little things that like you just sit in and your little head pops out the top. So I sweat in there, and then I take a cool shower after.
Perfect.
So I do that here, but I really
That's
love
awesome.
the bathhouse because, it's got the sun, it's got all the stuff, and I can stay there for like an hour and a half and alternate between all the things.
Yeah.
And it's also cool on a psychological level too. It's cool because you're just in this place. It's all, they have men's days and women's days. Okay. So it's not co-ed, but it is all nude.
Oh, well then.
So there's not, and a lot of these bathhouses are like that. They don't actually allow, you could wear a suit, but most people are nude. And
is
so
there a reason for that?
I believe that part of it is maybe just the culture from which all of these came, because a lot of these, like there's Turkish, Jewish, Japanese, Russian, all these cultures have had bathhouses, and I think they've probably been nude since their time of origin, before we had little bikinis. I mean, bikinis didn't exist, like that long ago, right?
Well, thank you for bringing that up, so people aren't just like, I'm going to try this really cool thing and not knowing, because now that I know that, I will only be doing this at home.
Right. Yeah. So you need, and I will say that it's, and also I think there is some hygiene components too. Like they don't allow the suits in the jacuzzi, but you can wear the suit in the other place. Okay. Anyway, it's a pretty incredible thing to be surrounded by a bunch of women, all different ages and sizes and cultures and colors.
Yeah.
And everybody
see the value in that.
Everybody's there taking care of themselves. You get the first day you go, it's weird and you're all insecure and all these things and all this stuff. And then by the time you're done, you're like, oh my God, that was so amazing. Like, who cares about any of that stuff? I'm going to come back every week. Like, that's what every experience has been with anybody I've ever gone with. Yeah. And I will tell you that my grandmother and my aunt introduced me to this place.
Really?
I used to go with them. There was like
that's really cool. I really, really, really do see the value in it. It's just, for me personally, I'd probably have to do some sort of work around being naked in front of other people. It's not something that I do, but I can just see the picture of what you're painting, and think, wow, that probably is really cool. Yeah. Not for me just yet, but
well, in the meantime, Kelly, you could go to like Hot Springs, you could go to Mount Princeton, or you could go to Glenwood Springs, and you can do the same sort of thing there.
Yes. Right. For sure.
Hot Springs,
I love Hot Springs. Yes. Yeah. Cool. Thanks for sharing that. Okay.
Yeah. Thanks for your interest. So that's circulation. Oh no, wait, let's see. Wait. Yep. That's circulation. And then, oh no, I didn't finish the rest of circulation. So massage is also another thing I do for circulation. I like to do it more often than I currently am. Breath work is another circulation practice. There's specific ones for that. Therapy helps me process and get anything that's trapped in there, moving it through. So I've taken periods off of therapy, really mainly just for financial reasons in the past. I recommend that everybody in recovery has a therapist forever.
Yeah. Right.
Or coach, somebody with unbiased reflection. So therapy, processing tools, and then yoga. Those are my circulation practices. And then my fourth pillar is detox. And so that goes back to I do some of this at the bathhouse and here, but the sweating. So a lot of sweating, whether it's in my sauna, or I also take hot yoga classes for the purpose of sweating. And salt baths. I take salt baths to detox with the salt and also just to get hot. Supplementation. There's different ways you can help detox with supplementation, as I know you know. And I also I don't do them as regularly as I hope to, but there's like a liver and gallbladder cleanse that one of my Ayurvedic doctors leads twice a year. And maybe we haven't talked a lot about that, but that's a pretty awesome kind of detox where you're just kind of clearing out the filters of your body that accumulate so much junk living in our kind of toxic world. And then smudging. So like I burn Palo Santo and I clear, like I just burn it around me and in my house just to kind of clear energy.
Yeah.
And energy work. I do believe in like energy healers. So I do sessions with people who can help kind of clear my stuff that maybe I haven't been able to manage for some reason.
Is there a specific form of that, like Reiki, that you could speak to?
Reiki is pretty much what my go-to is.
Yeah.
And I've really like started to fully appreciate the value of distance healing too. Like it doesn't have to be somebody in person, like that stuff works. The main thing is you both just have to be in a calm state and you have to have the same intention.
Yeah. The very first time I heard about that, I was so, like my initial reaction was completely, what's the word I'm looking for? Skeptical. I was like, what, but then the more that I read about it, cause it started to just come up for me, I was like, wow. I mean, it's kind of funny cause it reminded me of just when these people watch YouTube videos of I think it's called ASMR, right? Just watching a YouTube video, you can have that really intense physiological response. Or like if I see somebody else brush somebody's hair, I get all those like tinglies. I don't know, maybe that's weird. If I see someone else brush someone's hair, it's almost as if I'm having my hair brushed and I start to get that same physiological response. And so I'm a believer in that now for sure.
Wow, that's super cool. I actually just read a study the other day and an article which quoted a study about distance healing and the studies and there's like, I think it's biophotons. That's what they're really studying, the biophotons that's the activating sort of thing in these healing sessions. So that's something we could dive into sometime is
let's do a podcast about that.
Biophotons. So, so cool. So thanks for sharing that about the hair brushing. I like that. That was like, I totally felt it. Felt it. Yeah. My next one is attunement. So some people would say this is just mindset, so a daily practice where or weekly, monthly, all the things where I attune to like higher frequencies, like, or just a different plane. So I do this through meditation, through visualization, through mindset practices, just like, practicing gratitude. Chanting, sound therapy. So there's just little sounds that I chant sometimes just to, they're from ancient traditions that I really do feel like kind of like if they just attune, I feel like I'm attuning to the right frequencies of like health and balance.
Yeah. I love that.
And wisdom and intelligence. So I'm a big fan of like sound healing, like sound bowl stuff. And I have my own bowls, but just making certain sounds, just actually like vocalizing certain sounds. And then, prayer, meditation type prayers or prayer type meditations. So that's how I attune. It's really just like setting intention setting. How do I want to show up today is attunement.
Yeah. I love that.
Resilience training is my 6th. So that's,
I can't wait to hear about that.
Yeah. So this one, obviously, because I didn't really do as much of this before, like weight training, and now I used to do more cardio and yoga, which kind of covers all of it. There's a lot of body, body weight resistance type stuff in certain yoga practices that I didn't really feel compelled to do more weight training on the side, but I've just been learning so much more about BDNF and about just, like I'm also 47 years old. So like bone density, like I want to be ahead of all that stuff, I want to have good practices in place. So I don't have to start lifting weights when I'm like 60 because my bones are getting weaker.
Right.
So
now I have a quick question. I thought I heard you say resilience training, but now I'm wondering if you meant resistance training. Did you mean resilience?
No, I mean resilience. I mean getting stronger.
Oh, okay.
I mean, getting stronger in all the ways, physically, mentally, spiritually, emotionally.
Okay. Love that.
So
okay.
I want to build resilience in my immune system, in my physical body, in my mental capacity, all the things. So in the physical way, I do that through weight lifting.
Got
and
it.
weight with my Peloton classes. I love those. Like I have all these weights now. I've got like 2 pounds up to 20 sets, and it's super cool. And I like it. So I do that. And then meditation, I do different like kind of like meditation practices to create resilience and tools and strength training and different ways to manage and to it's tools, right? And like sharpening tools. Therapy exercises that my therapist might give me or that other people might recommend to build more emotional resilience. And then Wim Hof, so getting back to like he has a breathwork technique that doesn't really fall into like it's like its own little class of breathwork, and it's this where you're building up nitric oxide and also your body's ability to lower your blood oxygen level and really have this oxygen dumped into your muscles. And you can build more resilience through breathwork training, his specific type. So the Wim Hof breathing technique is something that I think builds overall, like just kind of physiological resilience. So I've been trying to do that more because I think it covers a lot of areas, mind, body, and spirit. So that's my resilience training pillar. Does it all make sense, or is that too ambiguous? Okay.
Let me ask you one of those. You mentioned emotional resilience, and maybe you have gotten some of those tools from your therapist. Can you name one tool maybe that's helped you build emotional resilience? I think this is a big topic, and this is definitely an area where my pillars overlap. So I'm curious about that.
Yeah, I mean, I would say all of the tools that I've gained through my yoga training, and I'm not talking about the physical stretches of yoga, I'm talking about learning the science behind the mind and how it works. And so meditation, therapy, learning to observe the mind, how it works, and how to purposely, intentionally shift my thinking patterns. And to really notice the choice that I have in any given moment to think a certain thought and to go down a spiral, or to not think a certain thought, or to replace it with a different thought.
Yep.
And I got a ton of that through my yoga training. Initially, that was my first experience of it, because there are other avenues to learning this. You could just, CBT and meditation and there's a million things, but I got into yoga early in recovery, and I dove deep into the philosophy and science of it. And there's a ton of just like learning to watch this brain.
Yeah. We're the only species that can do that. Humans are the only species that can step outside of themselves and reflect on their own thoughts. It's what separates us from the animal world. So it's always so fascinating to me. Like I'll talk about this in group and I'll be like, your dog is not thinking about what it's going to do on Saturday. It's not having an existential crisis. Your dog is a lovely being and has a wonderful personality and all of those things, but humans are the only ones that can analyze our own thoughts. And I just think there's a lot of people I follow that talk about this, and it's one of the most amazing capabilities I think that humans have. It's completely fascinating to me. And I love that you said the word choice. I think for me, I'll talk about this more in my pillars, but I really grew up well into adulthood, fully believing so many things were outside of my control or outside of choice. I had no idea that you could choose your thoughts, choose your feelings, or at least choose which ones to focus on. I was so completely led by my emotional brain, which is really normal when you're a teenager. But as you grow and your brain develops and you mature, you're supposed to go through phases where the parental part of your brain, like the prefrontal cortex and that sort of thing, start to take the lead over the emotional brain. And I did not experience that until well into adulthood. I don't know I've spent a lot of time trying to figure out why, and that would be a whole therapy session for me, or 6 weeks worth. But that's fascinating to me. So I just wanted to touch on that. Choice, powerful. Our brain's capabilities, powerful. And these are skills These are skills that they're not genetically encoded. You either have them or you don't. They're things that have to be practiced. And in recovery, no better place to do it, right?
Yeah. And, that reminds me of two things. Like back when I was teaching my recovery through yoga workshops, which I led for a while, we often used the metaphor as like a dojo, because like also martial arts is a similar in the way that it trains your brain, like opportunities to train your brain in a safe environment all the time. You go to this one place, you get on your mat, or I don't know a lot about martial arts, but you go into this certain place and it's an opportunity to see all the stuff, all of your habits in a contained environment and start to work on them. Right. So there was that. And I think to your point about like a choice, I think a lot of people in our culture, if they get a diagnosis of major depression or diagnosis of, anxiety disorder or something like that, then it's like, it's easy to subscribe to like, yep, this is what I have. And I just need to treat it and accept it.
Yeah.
Where actually, if you start to learn what you were just saying, we are with the only species that can do this. We can start to see our thoughts. And yes, we may come in, we may be short. We might have gotten shortchanged in the neurotransmitter department. So we might have to bump up those in different ways.
Yeah.
But we can control so much of like, it, you just said your dog doesn't think about it what he's doing on Saturday, nor does he, ruminate on the fact that he peed in your room 2 weeks ago.
Yep, that's true.
Right. But we do.
Yeah.
We do all that. We'll totally ruminate and just get stuck on something. And that's where depression and anxiety come. We get stuck, we get in these spirals. So if we can start to see the habits and patterns of the brain, then we can have so much more control. And then we can maybe move ourselves away from that diagnosis. Maybe we have a propensity towards depression or anxiety, but we don't have to subscribe to that's what we've been given. And, it's just a whole different way of going about it.
100%. You just touched on such a huge issue. And this is a lot of what I'm going to talk about in my pillars, but depression is not who you are. You are not a depressed person. If you take that identity on, you're in danger. Depression is an experience, and it can be a fluid experience where you can go in it and out it. And it's something that you as a person who is made up of so much more than depression is just simply experiencing. And I think it's such an important thing to figure out how to separate those two things, who you are and what you're experiencing. Because if you really start to tread down that, and I did this for most of my life, if you go down that road of taking it on as an identity and believing that depression is as ingrained in you as, your DNA, I think you're in trouble. So that's a paradigm shift that I experienced at some point. So,
well, in the beginning,
insight.
Kelly, it's also kind of a relief to get a diagnosis or something in the beginning, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So then you don't feel like it's not such, I don't know, there's just so much confusion. Then you get this diagnosis, and then there's all these things that, you're now exposed to as far as like treatment and like support groups and stuff. But then it's the identity thing. It's just like, okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. So it's interesting.
So
thing.
good. So good.
So I'm almost done with mine. So that's it. Wim Hof breathwork. That's my resilience training. And then maintenance is my 7th one. Okay. So maintenance is working with a functional medicine doctor, functional medicine nutritionist like yourself, just making sure I've got the whole functional medicine component covered, kind of, yearly lab work, looking at all the things, staying on top of my biochemistry. Chiropractic, I'm a huge fan of. So I believe that's my main, and massage also falls in there. Yeah. And so that's just maintenance of this vehicle. As it's just like going to you have a good mechanic, make sure I always need to have a good mechanic wherever I live. I make sure I get that set up, it's so important. Yeah. And then my final one is rest. And so that is good sleep hygiene and amount of sleep and yoga nidra. And I count my blessings all the time because I don't have a problem sleeping. I can sleep And I work with a lot of people who can't, and I know how
Mhm.
lucky I am, and I know how
Mhm.
horrible it is when I don't have enough sleep.
Mhm.
So, but I also try to make sure I get good quality in, and I get enough and all the things. And yoga nidra, if I, for some reason, don't have enough sleep or I need to restore because I've just been like gone through a really stressful situation or whatever, then yoga nidra is a tool in that category too, that I utilize often. So those are my pillars. And I will say that, yoga, Ayurveda, and essential oils, those three, they weave through all of them. Like there's essential oils for every single one of those. There's a yoga practice for every single one of those pillars. So those are things that they're part of my life. They really enhance everything and give me some like good tools to reach for all the time. But so proper nourishment, activation, circulation, detox, attunement, resilience training, maintenance, and rest. Those are my 8 pillars.
I love that. And I think it's cool that we didn't talk too much about this beforehand because you organized yours in a totally different way than I organized mine. And so I think that's really cool because it just gives people an opportunity listening to just piecemeal their tools together. Like maybe they liked something that you talked about. So much insights I've taken here, just listening to you talk about those, and maybe something that I talk about resonates with them. But man, I just love those, so many eye-opening moments, like even just the word activation. I'm just like thinking about that so much because one of my favorite things is asking people and asking myself, like, what makes you come alive? And so hearing you talk about that and this really, just the words you used and in this really structured way is helping me to organize my thoughts around that topic. Man, I just love that. So very cool. Nourishment, activation, circulation, detox, attunement, resilience training, maintenance, and rest. So good.
And I would say in regard to the activation part, like that's a good example of something that might be totally different for somebody who comes from a history of major anxiety. Even though I've had anxiety too, my past, the heaviest thing, the strongest pattern was depression. So like, how do I activate out of that versus like somebody with anxiety may need to like daily have a serious, like, really calming thing, like the opposite of that,
Right. Absolutely. I want to ask you one more question before we move on to my pillars. Have you noticed a pattern? Maybe this happens with you, maybe it doesn't, but there's this idea of keystone habits, which are sort of like pillars themselves. So for somebody, running might be a keystone habit for them, and they do it 3 times a week, every week. And when they start to find themselves in this place of like work got busy or there was a family emergency or whatever, and running took the back burner, other habits start to fall behind it. So I'm curious. So for example, running fell off the map for them. Then they maybe had a thought of like, well, I'm not running, that all black or white thinking, who cares if I eat 6 slices of pizza today when I normally wouldn't do that. So then the nutrition starts to fall off. And maybe they have a meditation practice and that starts to fall off. So I'm just curious, of all the pillars that you just discussed, have you ever noticed a pattern where if one of those key things starts to fall away, it can create a domino effect for you? Would you say that any of these is, maybe all of them are keystone habits, or is there one that jumps out at you more than the others? Have you experienced that?
For sure. The one that jumps out more than the others, because it shifts so much instantly and keeps me either on a great track or could help me, or could let me backslide if I don't do it, would be the circulation, but specifically cardio or aerobic exercise.
Okay.
So I'm going to say it's exercise.
Mm-hmm.
Because once I exercise, I suddenly don't crave, chocolate or sugar. I'm craving something more healthy. I want to meditate. I want to make sure I take a, nice shower, and I want to eat good food, and I want to it helps everything else work. It makes me tired and have good sleep. So
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I'm going to say that one. Do you want to share yours right now, or do you want to share yours later? I'm curious as to what yours would be.
The keystone habits. I would
I can ask you
say
at the end. I can ask you at the end of your
Yeah, I
pillars. If
feel
you,
like I'll have more clarity around that maybe
okay.
if we circle back around.
Yeah.
Because I think I kind of know what they are, but I probably need to process a little bit.
But
So
sleep
you
too. If I don't
what's
get
that?
good sleep, if I don't get
Mhm.
good sleep, everything falls quickly.
Yeah, same here. Oh, that's for sure a keystone habit for me. So yeah, so you gave us the 8 pillars, but you kind of said they most of them fell under the umbrella of self-care and stress management. And for me, I didn't really kind of go through the practice of naming my pillars, but I did have them in 2 different buckets, one more
Mhm.
physiological and one more psychological. I
Mhm.
noticed that pattern as I was writing these things out, that they really did parcel nicely into those 2 categories. So if I
Cool.
were to talk about the biochemical pillars for me, there's a handful of them and there's a lot of overlap with what you talked about. So the first one is nutrients, but specifically protein and vitamin C. Going through the training that I've
Ah,
had and doing all of this work, it has become glaringly evident to me that I need to seek out those 2 things on a daily basis, or I will very quickly feel the ramifications of being deficient in those things. So, and this was a huge paradigm shift for me years and years ago when if you've listened to my story in previous episodes, you know that what led me into the world of recovery was actually through the gateway or the doorway of autoimmune disorder. And so my first and primary focus at that time was healing from autoimmune disorder. And so that led me to the paleo diet and what's called AIP, or autoimmune protocol, which is uh, a more restrictive version of paleo, specifically for people who have autoimmune disorders. And when I started on paleo, I was attracted to paleo for a number of reasons, but the main reason was because I had read hundreds of testimonials of people that had my very specific autoimmune disorders and healed themselves with some version of paleo. So that's what led me to it. I wasn't like, "Ooh, I want to eat these foods." It was like, if this is what they're doing, then I'm going to do it because I want to live. And a lot of paleo was eating a lot of protein. There wasn't necessarily a threshold where you had to get to a certain amount of grams a day, but shifting my entire diet or way of eating to a protein focused diet was a huge shift for me. I was a carb person like most of America. I couldn't have articulated I was a carb person. I just knew what I liked, and it was pizza and bread and muffins and cookies. And so that was shifting over to a protein focused diet. The benefits were quick. They were incredible. They were mind altering. And that is a habit that I have kept today. And I literally cannot imagine my life without eating protein on a daily basis. And so sometimes I fall into the trap of imagining like emergency situations of like, what would happen if like this happened or that happened and I couldn't get my hands on animal meats every day. And I'll give you an example. I have a lovely, lovely, lovely group of friends that are super important to me, and I just love them dearly. And they're doing the Daniel fast this month. And the Daniel
I
fast,
don't know about that.
it's a biblical fast where you give up meat and focus mainly on vegetables and water. And they obviously, invited me to do it, and I just simply declined, which is another one of my pillars, learning the power of saying no. But I thought about it for a good minute, and I was like, I can't do this because I know exactly how I feel when I'm not eating meat. And it's dangerous for me and everyone around me. I mean, the first thing that starts to go is my mood. I can become very unstable in terms of irritability, frustration, lack of focus. I really do revert back to, in a lot of ways, the person that I used to be, which was led by emotions. Protein is incredibly grounding and stabilizing for me, and there's just no getting around that, and animal protein specifically. And so when it comes to nutrients, although there are so many critical and important nutrients, some of them take a little bit of a while to build up a deficiency too. And so you may not notice, a deficiency to folate on day one, but I will for sure notice a protein deficiency on day one. And so that's why it is 100% a pillar for me. And then vitamin C. It's one of the unique nutrients you really can't get from animal protein. And over the years, I will have very, very quick symptoms, like bleeding in my gums. As soon as my gums start to bleed, and the light bulb goes off, and I'm like, Kelly, you have not been getting enough vitamin C, and I immediately start supplementing, and the bleeding goes away. But then also it's my stress resilience. So vitamin C is probably the most nourishing nutrient for your adrenals, which is the glands, the little glands that sit on top of your kidneys. And the adrenals are what pump out your stress hormones and dopamine and adrenaline and stuff like that. And your adrenals need to be really well nourished on a daily basis to help you cope with stress. And so when vitamin C falls, it's a water soluble nutrient, your body can't hold on to it. So you need a daily amount. So as soon as I start noticing my stress resilience is low, if I can't quickly identify that it is sleep or something else, it's usually vitamin C. I just evaluate what I've been eating in the last couple of days, and it's like, oh yeah, I need to go back. So from a nutrient perspective, protein and vitamin C are non-negotiables for me. The emotional stability and stress resilience that I gain from those two nutrients on a daily basis are just indescribable. So yeah, so those are my nutrient ones.
Those are awesome. And I 100% relate to I'm becoming much more aware of vitamin C now in my own life, but for sure the protein is a hands down, like it's one of those things that sometimes I even forget to mention because it's just so understood, like it's non-negotiable. And I wonder about the same thing too. There's a yoga retreat I want to go to in India sometime, and they don't, like, there's no meat. Yeah. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to have to like stock up on all the jerky and bring all of my own protein there.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't do beans. I'm pretty paleo. I don't do beans. My body doesn't do great with that. So super interesting. I love that. This is
first thing
I'm so
I think
excited
about.
to dive. Yeah, me too. Me too.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
what's next?
From a biochemical perspective, just managing my blood sugar on a daily basis. And I go through phases where I'm actually getting readings. I use my Keto Mojo, which will, do a finger prick and test my blood sugar numbers. I'll go through phases where I'm like, I want to hyper focus on this a little bit and see where I'm at. And that will usually only last like a couple of weeks. And then I go back to just sort of intuitive eating in terms of being really in tune with the way that food makes me feel. But, being cognizant of not eating things that shoot my blood sugar up really high, because I will have an anxiety effect from that. And I would say that it's a pretty rare occurrence for me now, because the way that I eat, not just from my mind telling me, Kelly, you feel better when you eat this way, but really just I'm completely drawn to the way that I eat. Like it's automatic at this point, because I've done it for so long now and it just works for me, that it's a very rare situation where I would eat something and I can feel that blood sugar spike and it turns into that anxiety feeling. And I can quickly identify this is not anxiety. This is what I just ate. So it would have to be like a piece of gluten-free cake I have at a restaurant or something, which is a very rare occurrence for me. I don't eat out very much. So that is something that I do keep an eye on, it's just making sure that my blood sugar is in check, because that affects my mood as well. And it specifically can throw me into that kind of fight or flight anxiety type phase. So that was very common for me in the beginning days of making that shift from carbs, carb focused to protein focused, but it's a rare occurrence for me now, but something I'm still cognizant of.
I have a question about that, Kelly. So you mentioned, and I'm sure this is you just maybe doing some experiments on yourself. I'm not sure, but you mentioned that you get hyper focused on something for a couple of weeks. Is that when you're doing just like an experiment?
Pretty much. Like I'm just constantly, I have a lot of interests, and they usually fall under the category of like nutrition or addiction. And so, I get bored easily, and I get drawn into different directions. And so maybe I'll read something or I'll notice that things feel a little off with me. And I'm like, oh, I want to fine tune this. So it's really just a part of that refinement process kind of that you mentioned, where I'm like, it's a little check-in. So I guess maybe it falls under maintenance for me too, right? Like, hey, I just want to see how I'm doing in this area. And after a couple of weeks of monitoring, I can check that box, right? Like, okay, I'm good, moving on. That satisfied my interest for the moment. everything checked out to be okay. I could take this off the list of things I need to worry about right now, right? Blood sugar's good, moving on, right? So yeah, like you could call it a little experiment, but it's probably more like maintenance work.
Okay.
Mhm. And then sleep. I'm so glad that you brought up sleep. For sure, a keystone habit for me. If I do not get good sleep, I am less likely to eat. I will always still stay focused on protein and stuff like that the next day, but I will find that cravings do go up. Um, and sometimes I indulge in those cravings and sometimes I don't. Probably more for like chocolate. I'll notice that cravings for chocolate go up if I miss sleep, but I am a master protector of my sleep. Everybody in my life knows it is of utmost importance to me. My husband thinks I'm insane. 7:30 last night, we were watching TV and I was like, wow, what time is it? It is getting ready, for me to go to bed, which is usually at 8:30. So it was a whole hour before, but I had been woken up by my 15-year-old the night before at 10:30 at night. And I thought something was wrong. Everything turned out to be fine. He just had a question, but it took me a long time to fall back asleep. So I did not get good sleep the night before. So I could feel my body kicking into sleep mode at 7:30 last night, which, like I said, usually starts around 8:30 for me. But I'm really, really aware of when my body, I can tell the moment that my melatonin has been released into my bloodstream. If somebody like some science biohacky guy wanted to come to my house and be like, we're going to do blood tests and check this out, I guarantee you I would nail the exact time. I know what it feels like. I know
Can you
exactly what
explain
it
it?
feels like. And I
Tell
honor
us.
it. And a
Tell
lot
us
of
what that
people don't
feels
honor
like.
it. What's that?
Can you tell us? Can you like explain it a little bit more? What do you feel?
It's like a downshift. It's a
Okay.
full body downshift. And I can feel it from my head to my toes. And one of the things I've talked about with a lot of people is we've gotten into the habit from a circadian rhythm perspective. Your melatonin is usually released around 9 p.m., but that can be very different from one person to the next, depending on how they're synced up with their circadian rhythm. But we've gotten into this habit of ignoring those natural rhythms. Somebody might be like, oh, it's too early for me to be tired and I really want to watch this Netflix show. And so they stay up and they sort of miss the ship coming into the harbor, so now they have to wait until the next phase of sleep for that melatonin to sort of be pulsed in again. And so I have just become really aware of when that happens for me, and I honor it. And I have a little very, short bedtime routine that I follow, and it's off to bed for me. And I basically just I turn the parenting baton over to my husband and hey, take so-and-so's phone at this time, make sure so-and-so brushes his teeth before you go to bed, yada yada, and I'm out. Everyone knows, like, mom is not momming at 10 o'clock at night unless it's an emergency, there's a sick kid or whatever. I am not momming at 10. I'm sleeping. So yeah, I'm fiercely protective of that. And at the beginning of the pandemic, I believe it was the beginning of the pandemic, I had always wanted to do something. And I was like, this is the perfect time to do it. I had known how beneficial it can be if you go to bed and wake up at the exact same times every day. And I was like, we're going to do an experiment. And that experiment turned into a practice that I've never, ever reverted back on. I started going to bed. I start to get ready for bed at 8:30, hopefully asleep by 9:30, but I set my alarm for 5:45 every single day, regardless of what's going on. It's a Tuesday, it's a Saturday, it's a Sunday. It does not matter. The alarm is set for the same exact time and I'm up by 6. And I do, and unless there's like a, early morning flight you have to take that disrupts that pattern, I do not sleep past that time. I won't do it. And it has been life-changing for me. I mean, I don't even know how to explain it. It's just regulated so many things in my life, from my emotions to my energy levels. I used to experience a lot of headaches on days that I would sleep in later than other days. So maybe Monday through Friday, I was getting up at a certain time and then sleeping in on the weekends. And I would always just notice a huge lack of energy on the days that I slept in. I would feel groggy, less focused. Then it would be harder to fall asleep those nights. So I've retrained my body to always go to bed and always wake up at the same time. So my body it doesn't feel chaos. It knows what to expect on a daily basis. And that's been a huge pillar for me. So yeah, I know I was an insomniac for most of my life, totally opposite than your experience, Nikki.
Oh, wow.
Mm-hmm.
That just sounds like the worst purgatory experience I can ever
Mhm.
imagine.
It was
is
horrible.
insomnia.
And I had fallen into the identity that I was an insomniac. I believed that I was an insomniac and that maybe at that point nothing could be done. And clearly that is not the case. I had also believed, because I had always been told that I was a night owl, like, oh, you're so hard to get out of bed in the morning. My mom would tell me that when I was younger, and it's true. It was true. But I always thought, oh, I must be a night owl. I'm not a morning person. Those were big parts of my identity. And I am 100% a morning person now, 100%. And, there are some genetic components to that. Like, I've really looked into this because I hear people say those things all the time. I'm not a morning person. And I'm like, do you want to be? Because you could be, and they, like me, maybe didn't believe that that was possible. And so I wanted to know if there was a genetic component, and there is some research to suggest that some people may have slightly different patterns. And I'm open to that idea, but I'm also a firm believer that if you want to be a morning person, you can do it. It is a skill. If I can do it as a insomniac for decades and decades and decades, and a night owl, you can do it too, for sure.
I have two questions regarding that, all of that. One, when you were shifting to this new morning routine, 5:45 a.m. up by 6, I think you said, or is that what you said?
Yeah, 5:45 up at 6.
Was that a big change from where you, like, how gradual was that? Was that a radical shift? Were you kind of around that, but just not consistent before then, or what? Because I'm really trying to make myself a morning person, and it's taken me some time.
Yeah. When I was younger, I could easily sleep until like 11 a.m. or 2 p.m. or whatever, because I'd be up late partying and that sort of thing. And that was a really regular cycle for me. But at this point, I had been a mom for, 12, 13 years or whatever. And so sleeping in on the weekends when you have kids is not really sleeping in. And so at that point, I can't imagine I was ever in bed later than 9 a.m. I would probably usually be up mulling around by 8 a.m. But I would say it was a gradual shift that I implemented over the course of a couple weeks. So someone might think that was gradual. Someone might think that's kind of quick. I don't really know. I guess it depends on your perspective, but yeah, over a couple of weeks, just sort of started bumping that weekend alarm clock up. And I would say within a relatively short period of time, maybe a month-ish, it really started to become second nature. And it was like nailed in. It was drilled in for me. It was like, I'm never going back. This is pretty easy now. It felt hard in the very beginning, but after probably a month. I wish I had journaled around that time because I don't know. But if I remember correctly, it became relatively easy in a short period of time. And now it's just second nature. Now I can't imagine sleeping in. I don't know what that would do to me. it would feel really weird.
Well, that's super inspiring. Right. One of my things right now is light. I'm trying to use light to help me wake up. So I have one of those alarm clocks that has a super bright light, looks like the sun.
Yeah.
So I have that go off at the same time. So, and I
is
just
it the one that
like
gradually increases the light?
It gradually increases for 10 minutes, but then it just holds strong for 10.
Okay.
So I just have it going as soon, around the time that I'm trying to program myself to get up. And that has been helpful, because even if my eyes aren't open, it could. I don't have the birds on right now. That's a little bit too much. I don't need all of that in the morning. Okay. I love birds. I listen to birds all the time, but I just need the light. So even if my eyes aren't open, I face the light, and then I start to open them. And mornings are just really hard for me to even if I go to bed later, my body wants to wake up at 7:30. So even if I go to bed, it doesn't matter the time, my body wants to wake up at that time. So I'm trying to shift it to, 6:30.
Okay.
But it hasn't been that easy. So maybe we could talk about that another time. But anyway, I just want to share my little light. I have this little light that I'm trying to use to help kind of mimic the sun.
Have you watched
I wanted to ask
Andrew?
also,
Oh, okay. I was just going to say, have you watched Andrew Huberman's videos specifically about shifting, specifically about he has a protocol for that?
One of them, but maybe he has multiple.
I think he only has one protocol, but he's mentioned it in multiple videos, but there is one where he goes into length about implementing his protocol. Yeah.
Okay.
Just wanted to bring that up.
Yeah, I want to revisit that with you, maybe like on another conversation, because I did take some notes about something. It was really about like when to exercise in the morning that he talked
Mhm,
about too
mhm.
with that. So your insomnia years, would you say those were very much hormone related and just all the imbalance that you had going on? What?
Yep, it was just a life that was imbalanced, just a lot of chaos, just no real discipline around going to bed and getting up, and that chaos, I was a bartender for many years.
Right.
So that was a problem. And then even years after I wasn't bartending anymore, I would have that battle of like, I know I need to be sleeping because the kids are going to be up early, like when my kids were really small. And it was just like, no matter what I did, I felt like I couldn't fall asleep at a reasonable time, but it was because I was not sending my body those signals to pick up on. I was not providing the information that my body needed to be able to go, oh, this is what she's doing. This is the pattern. We're going to follow suit. That really was the missing key for me. So
Got it.
yeah, once I learned to do that, everything changed. Yeah.
Amazing. Super inspiring. Thank you for that.
Yeah. Man, I have so much more too. We might have to do a part two because I have a lot more. I don't know if we'll get through them all, but let's see. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 more biochemical ones and then my psychological one. So I'll try to get through them kind of quickly, but one of them is, I learned the concept of a hunger scale years ago, and just getting in touch with when you're actually hungry versus when you're actually full. And that was a game changer for me because I very much lived in that reactive way. Most of my life was just simply reacting like a dog to my environment and not really using my rational brain and thinking things through and being deeply connected to my body. And so I check in with myself every day, all day, like, oh, where are you at? Are you hungry? What does that hunger feel like? Does your belly feel hollow? Do you have an actual hunger craving? When's the last time you ate? What did that meal consist of? Was it nutrient dense enough to get you to this point? Am I just bored? Do I just want something, but I don't necessarily need it as fuel? Like so many different ways I sort of use the hunger scale. And some people would, call that more, the hunger scale is a tool, which is part of intuitive eating. So maybe it would be more descriptive to say that what I'm talking about really is intuitive eating, just being really in tune with what my body needs and when it needs those things. And I use the hunger scale as a tool. So just to give you an example, I try to eat to a +4 and I don't start eating unless I'm at a -4. And so the hunger scale is, -10 to 0 and then +10. I won't go into too many details about it because we don't have time, but it's just a really great tool for helping you to regulate those things, and asking yourself, do I really need this food right now? Or do I really want it? And even if you want it and you don't need it, sometimes that's still a good choice, right? You don't always have to need it. Sometimes food is about social connection and other reasons too, right? But that's a tool that I use quite a bit. So
Do you see yourself doing a podcast on the hunger scale
yes,
another
I
time?
do have plans to do a podcast all about intuitive eating. And so that'll be something that we talk about. Yeah. I had this one under biochemical, but it was very much intermingled with psychological, but managing my energy. This is a really, really big one for me. And so years ago, when I was learning about autoimmune disorder, I learned about something called the spoon theory. You can look it up on your own. Yeah, you're familiar with it, Nikki. But that learning about the spoon theory was like, oh my gosh, this is my life. Like I basically felt at that time that I woke up with only a finite amount of spoons. And every time I had to do something, wash the dishes, brush my own teeth, I was, taking a spoon out of my hand and putting it back in the drawer, so to speak. And if it was 3 o'clock in the afternoon and I had run out of spoons, and I still needed to make dinner, get the kids ready for bed, go to the grocery store, any of the amount of things that still needed to get done, I was in trouble. And it was incredibly difficult. And so I'm totally recovered from my autoimmune disorders at this point. They're basically not technically in remission, but I'm symptom free for the most part. But I still think of the spoon theory in terms of I don't have infinite amounts of energy every day. both physical energy and emotional energy. And so I have to be really careful about what I lend my energy to. I am an Enneagram 2. If you're familiar with Enneagram, it's like a Myers-Briggs type thing. And Enneagram 2s are the helpers. And for most of my life, I could very, very easily just help all day long and not say no, and just freely give out tons and tons of energy and find myself extremely drained and, waking up with an empty cup. And to be honest, that was a big part of what led to me developing autoimmune disorders in the first place. So learning how to manage my energy is really important. And I had this kind of in my psychological thing, but I'm going to bring this part into it because it really piggybacks on it. Having boundaries too. And I'll talk a little bit about the emotional energy. So we are officially in January of 2023. I do not know when this podcast will come out, but this has been a very emotional week for our nation. On Monday night, we had a young man in the NFL named Damar Hamlin go into cardiac arrest on the field, which was, from my understanding, like a super rare event. Like you see NFL players getting hurt all the time, but a huge portion of the nation was watching, and you couldn't even see him in cardiac arrest, but you knew he was on the field and you knew they were probably administering CPR. Anyways, I'm bringing this up because this is a prime example of something that can be dangerous for me. So when celebrities die or something happens to somebody that I don't know, I typically do not become emotionally involved in that. Like a celebrity can die and I'd be like, well, their card got pulled. But on a rare occasion, I do become very emotionally invested in those things. And I'll give you two examples: when Anthony Bourdain passed away and when Philip Seymour Hoffman passed away. I was wrecked, right? I don't know those people, but I loved those people, and parts of their story, who they were, things they struggled with, just their personalities. Like I was very enmeshed in those things. Anthony Bourdain wrote one of my all-time favorite books, which is Kitchen Confidential. I loved his shows. I just loved him. And when he died, I didn't just have like oh man, this is sad. Like I was trying to go through my week of making food and taking care of the kids and going to work and being the human that I have to be every day, while still carrying that really, really heavy weight of his death. And the same thing happened with Philip Seymour Hoffman. And this week I've been really emotionally invested in what happened with Damar Hamlin. And so this is something about managing my energy. I've been allowing myself to check updates a couple times a day to see how he's doing, which he's had a miraculous recovery, and they took the air tube out, I think, last night. But I have to be really careful about making sure I still have enough spoons to get through all of the day, and making sure I understand that as much as I'm cheering for this person, I can only lend so much emotional energy to it. And I got to come back to reality, right? So I don't know if that experience resonates with people. I have talked with other people that can kind of identify where maybe for them it's war. There's a war going on somewhere, or maybe for them it's, something that happened in Iran, like there's upset in that region, or it's a climate change thing, or a shooting, a mass shooting, right? But there's so many things that we are not directly connected with that are happening in our world that we find out about because the 24-hour news cycle, and we literally cannot give all our energy to all of those things, right? It's really hard. And so I just wanted to bring that up because managing my physical energy, my emotional energy, just keeping myself in check with those things is a big part of my recovery, because I'll start to spiral. If I allow myself to get too caught up in some of that, I will start to spiral. So I don't know if that's helpful or not, but that's just me, right?
I'm really affected by everything that you just said for whatever reasons. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
I feel like it's a glimpse into, we get to know each other, and everybody else gets to know us through this. And And these are, as humans, we are just so unique and fascinating and multifaceted. And I would imagine that the Philip Seymour Hoffman and Anthony Bourdain thing, maybe there's other, obviously there was, mental health and addiction stuff behind them. And so what, kind of what triggers or what brings up in us. And then, and I didn't even hear the story about Damar. So this is all news to me. So maybe that's also
Oh, wow. Yeah.
yeah.
All I'll say is that I had to figure out how to put a container around it. So I've been praying in the
Yeah.
morning and at night. And if I do feel moved in the moment, I'll pray throughout the day. But I'm limiting myself to like checking 3 updates a day, just to make not going beyond that, because I still got to do all these other things. And so that's my little way of participating, I guess, in his recovery and cheering him on. So yeah.
Well, and Kelly, I think boundaries and the spoon theory, if anybody doesn't know about that already, looking it up and, diving into that even a bit more, energy management is huge. It's just so big. I mean, it's what did you call them? Keystone habits.
Yep.
So
very big.
That's big. Thanks for bringing that up.
Yeah, the last 2 that are in my biochemical bucket are understanding the power of dopamine. And I'll pick up that topic when I talk more about when I move into the psychological piece. But basically what that means is if my amygdala or my primal brain gets an idea about something that maybe I shouldn't pursue, I recognize very quickly that if I play around with that thought, I am now ratcheting up my dopamine, which is the neurotransmitter of anticipation. And I'm basically feeding that beast and strengthening that, craving or temptation, whatever it is. And for me, it's most often red wine. Something will happen. I'll smell something, see something, hear something, and I'll get the thought of red wine, which is what I, craved the most, drank the most, that sort of thing. It was all about the red wine. And so if that thought or that experience comes into my head, like, maybe you could just have a sip of red wine and see, I immediately go, no. Like I tell like a parent would a child, I go, no, not an option. We're not even going to go there. Let's, shift our attention to something else. Because if I were to sit there and go, oh, here's all the different ways that I could figure out how to have a sip of red wine or be the kind of person that could just have a glass and whatever, I'm literally just stimulating my dopamine. And then the craving becomes stronger and stronger and stronger. And then you really put yourself into a place of, potential relapse or a danger zone. So understanding the power that our thoughts and behaviors and, those things that we have over this chemical in our body is really, really important. So I keep that in check. My dopamine is.
What did you call it? Just keeping dopamine in check? Is that what is that how you
I keep it in check by not increasing my own dopamine levels. When I'm describing this to somebody else, I tell them, don't play around with the idea. When the idea comes up, don't start handling it and playing around with it and ruminating on it. You immediately have to go, nope. However you do that, stop, whatever, all kinds of tactics that could work for different people. But for me, it's just telling myself as if I'm parenting myself, I'm learning how to reparent myself. No, and that works remarkably well for me.
That's genius. That's a genius.
It's simple, but it works. And then the last biochemical piece is desensitizing my stress response. So I was always the person who would have this really intense reaction to something stressful. And it could be something really minor, like when I was younger, I can think of situations where like, oh, so-and-so said this about you or whatever, right? Like when I was in high school, and it would be like, oh, I'd have this like huge emotional response that would immediately kick me into fight or flight. If I just got even a whiff of like bad news within my family, or I don't know, there was literally so many things that could trigger it. And that was crippling. That was really, really crippling for me, because I hated to be the kind of person that would have these really over exaggerated emotional responses to things where I felt like I was being kicked into fight or flight. And as soon as I was kicked into fight or flight, I immediately was like, what's going to fix this? A cigarette, a drink, a piece of sugar, a chocolate chip cookie. Like my brain would immediately go there. And I learned at some point during my recovery process that I have a lot of power over that too. I have a lot of power over that. And I remember very vividly sitting in a classroom with a woman that was giving a speech about shifting from the sympathetic state to the parasympathetic state. And she told me that there had been studies that had been done that had shown that people who mastered this skill could switch over to the parasympathetic state in less than 6 seconds. And that was mind-blowing to me, because if I say it was like 8 a.m. and something really stressful happened, it could literally take me hours and hours and hours, potentially all day, to come down from that. Like the adrenaline rush that I would feel, I could not recover from that quickly. I could never recover from that. It would affect the whole rest of my day. And you spend the rest of the day like trying to get the train back on the track. And it was so, so hard. And through this process of it probably looks different, but it's very similar to what you were talking about of like of observing your own mind and your own thoughts and that sort of thing. Using mindfulness techniques and being really aware of what's going on in my body, I've been able to reduce that down to probably seconds. I have never timed it. But this did happen to me very recently. I got a phone call from the school, my kid's school, and immediately that, the sirens started to go off and I felt the adrenaline kick in, and I just used my tools, and within, it could have been seconds or it could have been just a couple minutes. But I was able to shift back over and completely recovered from that. And I would have never been able to do that 10 years ago, 20 years ago. So learning how to use tools, specifically mindfulness, to desensitize yourself to that, and to recover quicker has been a huge part of my recovery. Huge. So that leads me to the psychological ones. And I'll try to, again, I don't know. Yeah. I'm probably really well known for saying, I'll try to get through this quickly. And then that never, ever happens because I'm so long-winded. So I don't know. There's a lot here. Maybe we'll just get through it. And if this ends up being really long, I can split it into part 1 and part 2, or we'll see. We're just going to roll with it. We're going to take imperfect action here. So from a psychological perspective, there's definitely scripture that is pillars for me. One of the number one pillars for me is Matthew 5:37. I heard this scripture many years ago when I was sitting in a MOPS meeting. MOPS stands for Mothers of Preschoolers. It was like a mom's group that I was in when my kids were really young. And I heard this scripture, let your yes be yes and your no be no. And I immediately went, that's who I want to be. That's who I want to be. I want to be the person who says, I'm going to quit smoking, and then I quit smoking. I want to be that person who says, oh, I don't know, whatever, watching my sugar intake today. And then I just do it. I was so tired of the tension of saying I was going to do something and wanting to do something and not being able to bring my actions up into alignment with that. And so I felt like I was just like smacked in the face in the most wonderful way when I heard that scripture. And that was the moment I decided to quit smoking. And I quit that night. I went home and smoked the rest of the pack, and I never smoked again. And so it's been 8 years, and I still have the piece of paper I wrote that scripture on from that very meeting. It's on my refrigerator, and it's been on my refrigerator every day for 8 years across multiple homes that I've lived in, because even though I have literally no desire to smoke, it's just such a wonderful reminder to me of who I want to be and how I want to show up every day, that my behaviors and the things that I say and do match up with, the person that I want to be. So that's really important to me. And then there's a couple other pieces of scripture. Deuteronomy 30:19 is one that I often rely on. It says, this day I call the heavens and the earth as witnesses against you, that I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life so that you and your children may live. And there's all sorts of context for that scripture. And so in a lot of ways, I've pulled it out of its context to apply to me. But basically what it speaks to me is that every day I am set up with 2 different paths. I grew up in New Hampshire, and Robert Frost is like my all-time favorite poet. And he wrote, the poem, oh gosh, what is the famous line? I chose the path less traveled and it's made all the difference. That's not an exact quote. I probably hacked that, but I really do have two paths before me, and one of them leads to life and one of them leads to chaos. And so every day when I wake up, I have to choose the path that leads to life. And I know that very vividly. So that's one that's really important to me. And then there's this word in the Bible called sophroneo. It's a Greek word. And basically it means sober-minded clarity. And it's such an important word to me because I lived so much of my life in that reactive state, in that chaotic state, that I don't want to miss a beat now. I want to be so fully present in every moment that I'm in, whether it's I'm interacting with my kids, I'm interacting with you, another human, I'm listening to a webinar, like whatever it is that I'm doing, I want to be so fully there. And I want to have that sober-minded clarity that is required for you to be fully present in all moments of your life. And so those are things that really prop me up, every day on a daily basis.
How do you spell?
It is SOPHRONEO.
Okay.
The next thing is a tool that I learned from Dr. Daniel Amen. And this is probably a tool that goes by a lot of different names, but for whatever reason, it resonated with me the way that he named it. He calls it ANTS, ANTS, and it stands for automatic negative thoughts. And it's basically a practice where you create mindfulness around what are the repeat offenders, some of mine were, I'm lonely and I'll always be lonely. That was a negative thought that I had all the time. And it was rooted in, beliefs that I had developed for various reasons. But I had to start learning how to identify what the automatic negative thoughts were, specifically what the repeat offenders were, what were the ones that sort of had a theme over me. And then I had to go through a process of coming up with the truth, like aligning it with reality, going, okay, what is this thought that I'm having? I need to figure out how to smash it right away. And the best way to do that is to offset it with a truth, oh, I'm actually married to the love of my life. I'm not lonely, right? I don't have to be lonely. I have friends I can call. I don't have to be lonely, So identifying the ants, the automatic negative thoughts, we could talk about that forever, but I'm just going to move on. And then I brought this up earlier, but having boundaries. When I was in my mid-20s, I read the book Boundaries, which is on the shelf of every therapist in America. It's written by Dr. Cloud. And that was a completely mind-blowing book to me at the time. I was like, boundaries, what are these all about? And I started reading about it and I'm like, you can have these? This is okay. That was just such a big deal to me. And one of the other books that Dr. Cloud wrote is called Changes That Heal. And in that book, he talks about boundaries sort of being like a fence line or like a property line. Actually, I pulled this out because I wanted to read it. It said, if I own a house with a yard, I am responsible for what's inside my property line. So I almost envision like a fence around your yard. If I want my leaves raked, I need to rake them or get someone else to do it, or they will remain on my lawn. In like fashion, my responsibility ends where my boundaries end, where that fence line ends. If my neighbor's yard has leaves, I can't be so presumptuous as to climb over the fence that separates our yards and start raking his leaves without his permission. If I want to help, I can ask, and he can choose to open the gate and let me cross his boundary line, but it is his choice. So much good stuff about boundaries in terms of visualizing and understanding what are the boundaries in your life. It is very easy for me to go down the path of enmeshment, especially with my kids. And that's a dangerous path. And so really, really understanding that boundaries are not only a good thing, they're incredibly healthy, and they're a sign of emotional health and psychological health when you have them and you can implement them. And they keep a lot of chaos out of your life, a lot of chaos. Boundaries at work, boundaries with friends, can't say it enough. Boundaries with family. I feel like that's where people struggle the most. And so that's a really, really big one. But yeah, that kind of piggybacked on the emotional energy conversation. That's why I brought it up earlier. Mm-hmm. There's also this other concept. It's called nonviolent communication. it's been brought into light by Dr. Oh gosh, now I'm blanking on his name. Is it Rosenthal? Marshall Rosenthal? I'll have to double check that. I was introduced to this though by Michael Joseph Ferguson, who is the author of The Drummer in the Great Mountain. If you have ADD or ADHD, that is the number one resource that I recommend. I can't recommend it enough. He wrote a book that's a guide map for people with ADD, but in that book and in his podcast, he talks about this concept of nonviolent communication. And it really doesn't have much to do with violence. And so some people are like, what does this mean? You know, but basically what it is whenever you experience a feeling, that is like an indicator that you have an unmet need. So a direct quote from him is, feelings are like the lights on a dashboard, letting us know whether a need is met or unmet. This was huge for me. I think it took me a very, very long time to even be able to recognize that I had needs and then identify what those needs were. This was very, very difficult for me. And so this practice of learning nonviolent communication, of, you know, basically what it is just that when there's a feeling, there's no need to judge it or whatever. It's just an indicator that there's an unmet need. And so you just want to start to do that work of identifying what the need is. And then as the parent of yourself, you want to go and meet that need. I cannot expect the people around me to meet my needs. I alone am responsible for that. You know, if you are a toddler or a child to a degree at a certain point, your parents are responsible for meeting a lot of your needs. But once you move into that adult space, that fully becomes your responsibility of knowing you have needs, identifying what they are, and taking the action to fulfill those needs. That was huge for me. You know, and piggybacking on part of that was like learning to speak up. You know, I had to learn how to speak up to protect my energy, to even just say, hey, I have a need. Can we maybe do this or consider this or that to help me meet that need? You know, maybe it's a conversation with my husband about spending money on doing something fun for me. Like I need to go spend the night somewhere and do something fun and clear my head. You know, being able to just say those things is hard for me. So that's a big one. You know, if you think about the fact that when you have a need, whether it's a need for protein, because you need energy and you need the building blocks to rebuild your body, or it's a need for affection or love or attention, if you don't take action to fulfill your own needs, they will find a way to fulfill themselves. And if you leave that up to your primal brain, that's where you get into trouble. That's where you invite the chaos into your life. So doing this work of identifying those needs first and taking the right action towards fulfilling them is huge to keeping you on that path of recovery. I'm trying to think of, you know, a dog is a very good example. If you do not meet the needs of your dog, you do not let him out to poop in the yard, you do not feed him in his own dog bowl, what's he going to do? He's going to go scavenge for food in your house somewhere and get it wherever he wants, from the trash, from the cabinets, all the places he's not supposed to go. You don't let him out to poop, he's going to poop on your bed or on the carpet or in the corner of a closet, right? That's because the dog's needs were not being met. And so it created chaos because it was going to find a way no matter what to meet those needs. And we are not that much different. We'll create chaos in our lives if our needs are not met. So maybe I talked about that too long, but I think it's a really big part of maybe most people's recovery, and definitely a big part of mine. Huge. I've got two more. So great. We're just going to rock and roll with this, but I'm going to drink some water real quick. One of these, I don't think we need to talk about much because it is a huge overlap with yours. But it's recognizing when my brain is telling me stories and creating a narrative. For me, that is what would throw me into a deep depression. I had no idea that I was doing that. I had no idea that my brain was creating a story. It was literally thinking up a scene that has never happened, like creating future, like a conversation with somebody or an event being broken up with, like all of these things. My brain would just start to think about those things. And then it was as if it became completely real. The brain actually cannot discern between imagination and reality. So if you are spending your time in a narrative, in a story that your brain has created, your body will experience that as real. I was constantly throwing myself into depression all the time by doing that, in my younger years, teenage, early 20s, even early 30s. And that was a huge part of healing from my depression, was recognizing when my brain was starting to do that. And I'm very quick at that now. That is a skill. Again, when you're developing a skill, you got to give yourself time to get really good at these things. So years ago, it could have been hours before I realized I was doing that. And now I will recognize it within seconds. I'll be like, wait. What are you doing? You're thinking up a whole, it happens a lot when I'm driving. You're thinking up a whole thing that hasn't even happened. My brain switches into that like default mode network or whatever it is. And I can quickly bring myself back to reality. And basically what I do is I compare it to the evidence. So if my brain starts telling a story, I go, okay, what's the evidence for that? I walked into a room and a woman gave me a snarly look. That could easily trigger a whole story about how I'm not good enough and I don't belong here. And she thinks I'm poor and like, who knows, right? Like I'm a mind reader, but I immediately go, what is the evidence for that? I don't even know this woman. Maybe she has gas, I don't know. Maybe she's looking at me crazy because she doesn't like my shoes. Sounds like a her problem, not a me problem, and so I am really quickly able to recognize those things. And then the last thing is thinking on a continuum. So I was thinking about this because this has been really life-changing for me, and it's something that I have to practice on a daily basis. So much of life actually does fall on a continuum. Like addiction falls on a continuum, disease falls on a continuum. Our thinking should be on a continuum. And I really did come from that very classic addiction trait of black and white thinking, very rigid in my thinking, either all in or all out, right? And I've really, really spent a lot of time developing this, for a long time when I had autoimmune disorder, that allowed me or led me to believe I was an unhealthy person. I still have an autoimmune disorder, but I see myself and believe myself to be a healthy person. Those two things can exist together. I am a person with an autoimmune disorder and I am a healthy person. I would have never been able to say that years ago because I didn't understand, thinking on a continuum, and I was very black and white. So if this, then this, if I have an autoimmune disorder, I'm an unhealthy person. So there's all sorts of different ways that manifests and shows up in my life, but it is something that it's like a foundational principle that I use as a filter when I'm hearing anything, when I'm looking at anything, because we live in a very divisive world right now, very divisive. And so people are being pushed to extremes and being pushed to their corners and feeling like they have to defend whatever their view is. And like, I have completely opted out of all of that. Like I opted out, because when you start to look at all of the issues that our world is facing, our country is facing, if you start to look at those things on a continuum, you completely change your thoughts and beliefs and attitudes and behaviors, and it changes the way you interact with other people. So somebody can be a this or a that, there's all these inflammatory terms for people that we use now, and still be my friend. It's like, I don't look at people as labels. I just look at them as the human, the really, really, really complex and unique and wonderfully made human that's before me. And so thinking on a continuum is good, because it also means that I don't look at foods as good or bad, right? Like I do not believe that Doritos maybe contribute to your health. There's all sorts of reasons why I could pinpoint that Doritos are not a healthy food, but I think a healthy person can still eat Doritos, and maybe in some sort of weird situation, the person needed to eat those Doritos. I don't know. Maybe they're having a wonderful conversation with somebody and they felt like that was the only way to connect with them, right? Like, oh, let me share these Doritos with you. There's all sorts of scenarios that you can think of. Maybe that's a really silly one, but I think utilizing
that one, actually,
thinking on a continuum is good. So
if you don't mind me sharing just a tiny bit about that, because that was a pretty revelatory period of my therapy journey, was learning to be okay with and even embrace the gray,
Mm,
you know,
embrace
moving
the
from
gray.
moving from black and white, either or, to and this
Mm,
and that can both
yeah.
exist. And my therapist at the time used DBT, dialectic behavioral therapy, to introduce all of that to me and to help me work through it. And it was game changer,
Mm,
probably one of the most effective therapeutic sort of um, trainings or work that I did with the therapist. So
mm,
it was so big, because
mm.
otherwise you're constantly managing. You're managing putting something over here and something over there, always,
Yeah.
physically, mentally, emotionally, all the things. So there's that. It's just tons of management.
Yeah.
And if you can just put everything into the objective pile rather than the subjective pile, focus on the facts, let the facts be your thing, even though, facts can be sometimes up to debate. But if you can take your emotional response out of things, and I just love what you said a moment ago too, about like, what's the evidence? What's the
Mhm,
evidence?
mhm.
Like, there's just so much that you wove into some really, really brilliant pieces that I think is going to help a lot of people.
Mm. Yeah, thank you
Really
for
speaks to
sharing
me.
that. I love the embrace the gray. And I had not thought about it in the way that you just said, of like having to manage those things, like, oh, this is happening, or this person is this. And now my brain has to assign meaning to that, and put a label on that and compartmentalize that. And that's a lot of mental energy. So yeah, I love the concept you just shared of just putting it all in the middle, put it all in the gray, in the bucket of objective. And, oh, I love that. Yeah. Very cool.
I love all that you're sharing. It's just like so many nuggets, so many gems, so many gems. I love how we came to this so differently.
Yes, me too. So there's so much packed into today. So hopefully you're still listening, or you've paused and you've come back, because we did kind of go really long today. And that's not usually, I try not to go too long, but you'll notice this is a pattern with me. I just say like, let's keep it under an hour. And here we are at 2 hours. But yeah, let's wrap it up. So, the summary of today is that I think it doesn't really matter what your recovery pillars are. It's all paths, right? It's what works for you. And it's such a journey of discovering what your pillars are and finding out what works and what doesn't work. We had some overlap, but we had a lot of things that were starkly different too. And I think that that's the beauty of recovery. A long time ago, I posted on Instagram, what are the ingredients in your recovery recipe? And I got all this really great feedback. And it was all different. It was all different. And so I don't believe in the dogma of one path, one way. I believe that it's such a wonderful journey of pulling all these tools together, and they have to resonate with you. If you enter into a program where somebody's like, you have to do this, and this, or you will not recover, that's a red flag for me, right? I mean, I do think that there's a few things that are going to be very, very common for folks, but I really truly believe that it looks different from one person to the next. And because for a lot of people, recovery is life or death. Maybe it isn't for everybody, but for a lot of people it is. I think you need to have that liberty to pursue recovery in the way that's going to work for you. If somebody told me right out of the gate I needed to go run a marathon, like, I just wouldn't have done it. I wouldn't have done it. I didn't want to run years ago. And so that would have been a barrier to recovery for me. So let's just honor people's paths, and take from people's stories what resonates with you, and put your, cobble together your own little recovery recipe. And recovery is never finished. I'll end with that. Recovery is never finished. It is a daily practice. It's a daily practice. I really have no desire to drink, but recovery for me is really not, recovery for me is not about not drinking. Recovery for me is making sure that I'm showing up as the best version of myself every day. And the result of that is not drinking. I don't wake up today and go, I can't drink today. I wake up today and go, how am I going to be the best person, the best version of myself today? And I automatically know that drinking is not a part of that equation. So it's just simply a result of that. And so, yeah. Thank you for being here. I will close on saying that our membership group is officially named Recovery U and will be launching soon. And so we hope to see you in the group. Nikki, do you have any final thoughts?
One final thought in relation to what you just said
Yeah.
about recovery and what it is. And I was going to share this earlier. Now it's even more perfect. My best friend, who's brilliant with words, once said, actually even on live air, there was she called in and there was this show about addiction going on in Seattle, and she called in to dedicate a song to me. And I might even get like emotional. Anyway, she, going through recovery with people that you love, if they were with you before and after, like we know stuff is a lot of misunderstanding, and relationships may or may not survive, all that sort of stuff. And she said, the one thing that she learned through witnessing me was that recovery is not a door that you walk through. It's a house you build and maintain forever.
Oh, wow. Wow.
And I was like, God, you nailed it. Like she nailed it.
Mm-hmm.
And, in the beginning, it's a lot of work. You got to do the 2x4, you got to frame it. You got to lay foundation. It's like when you have to pull from sources you didn't even know you had, and have so much support and resources to build. And then you build, and then you get to decorate. And then just like you said, it's not about like what you don't get to let in. It's about how you get to make it beautiful.
Yes. Oh, I love that. We're in the decorating phase and rearranging furniture. And I love that so much. Thank you so much for sharing that. It's such an amazing visual.
I agree.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. And we hope to see you in the next episode of The Addiction Nutritionist. Have a wonderful day, and don't ever stop practicing your recovery.
Bye.